Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jamie Paul Lamb. I'm reporting for KWTF, Channel 9, Eyewitness Reports. I'm sitting here with Eddie Detroit, and we were going to discuss a little bit about Eddie's life. And Eddie, glad to have you.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you remember from the 1960s?
Yes, Yeah, it was about 1960. I was about 8 years old at that time, and watching TV at my parents' house. And I was really interested in the National Geographic documentaries. And one particular documentary focused in on African drummers and dancers and primitive tribes. And watching that, I found myself getting extremely aroused and felt really strange. And I went, gosh, all of a sudden I looked down and I got my first hard-on. And I'm like, holy mackerel, look at this. What's going on here? I didn't know anything about sex at that time, 8 years old. And so every time National Geographic came on, of course, I had to watch it, to get more and more aroused. And later on, in 1963, I started taking drum lessons. Mom and my mother inspired me actually to take drum lessons because she noticed that I was banging on the glasses and the plates and everything at the dinner table with forks and knives and everything else, and had good rhythm. So she got me the best jazz drum teacher in the state of Michigan, where I'm from, and started taking drum lessons. And then got inspired by, of course, the Beatles and the Stones and everything, and really liked their music. So started a band in 1965 called the Premiers. And we did all the cover tunes, and my favorite cover tune, of course, was the Standells' Dirty Water. Love that song. And I was the lead singer and drummer of that band. We played at a lot of school dances and whatnot. By 1967, we broke up, and I discovered hippies, which I always wanted to be, that's what I became. And hung out with all the hippies in 67, the peak or the beginning of the psychedelic era with Sgt. Pepper and all that kind of stuff. And then, and by 1968, I was going to the Grandy Ballroom in Detroit, seeing all the groups, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and hung out with a group called the MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges, and saw them for the first time in early 68. And really enjoyed them, and just, hung out with these guys and partied with them. Hung out with the White Panthers and became a White Panther, and John Sinclair and those guys at that time. At all the festivals, every gig, and I was there. And I was, quite young, 16 maybe, 17. And then from there, started playing in coffee houses in late 60s with my friend Brandon Curtis from grade school. Played guitar and violin. So we had this kind of a avant-garde type of acoustic group that played at Saga Joe's Coffee House, 68, 69, 70, so on and so on. And so that was pretty much my peak of the 60s at that point. I wasn't really a songwriter at that point. I didn't start writing songs till about 1971, which on the newest album called Shaka Laka Lickum, a song called Wishing Cups is on there, and that was my first song I ever wrote. More abstract lyrics, more abstract poetry put to music, if you will, which, I'm not really a songwriter, I'm a poet that likes to do ad-lib and abstract poetry put to music. So that's the way I like to write songs. Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about this time in the early 70s. Was it London or was it Hollywood you had moved to?
Yeah, in the 1970, 71, and 78. Took off to London those 3 years. Became a street musician. I really got into being a street musician with some of the Irish musicians. They taught me how to play the Irish bodhrán. And heck, we were making all kind of money on the streets of London, having a great time, Everything was cheap back then, bed and breakfast were $50. Now it's $500, and passports were $20. Now they're $200, that type of thing, Who's making all the money, So London was great. Couldn't stay there but a year at a time because they considered street music not a real job, so I could get only a 1-year visa. So moved to Hollywood in '72 to pursue my career as a studio musician as well as a club musician. Again, wasn't really thinking about a lot of songwriting at that time. Just wanted to be a studio musician, bongo player, conga player, drummer. And at that time, hooked up with these 3 gals they were called the Slywin sisters, and the 2 sisters and one other girl who was actually, I think, a bass player of the GTOs, I think, at one time. Marcia was her name. And I became a studio musician for them, recording with them, and they got me a room at the old Tom Mix mansion in Laurel Canyon, right across from where they lived. Joni Mitchell lived down the street and so on. And there, I met Nico from the Velvet Underground. She was actually living in the wine cellar of that house for about 6 months. And Denny Doherty from the Mamas and the Papas. He needed a conga player for a gig at Terminal Island, which was a men's prison over there. I did 1 gig with him, and we got stoned all the way there and back on the bus. It was crazy. It was like some kind of a tour bus, you know. And then hung out with Nico and had a great time with her, and really loved the Velvet Underground, you know. One of my favorite bands of all time. And anyway, so I really enjoyed at that time. And then, of course, during the... Oh, okay, we're going to probably have to start over again. That's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Here, I can edit it out.
Oh, you can? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we stop and then we go back into it. So we go through the mid-'70s. The mid-'70s recorded with this New Age group, Robert Burns and Ron Dexter, who was nominated for Pulitzer Prize at that time for their New Age book called The Awakening Electromagnetic Spectrum, actually. And recorded with them, and so on and so on. By 1977, when the punk rock era came in, I jumped on the bandwagon and hung out with the Germs and the Mentors, and of course El Duce was one of my best friends at that time. We're good drinking buddies, you know, and he was a bouncer at the Ibar Theater, which was a seedy strip bar in Hollywood at the time, before the Mentors were even thought of, you know. I taught him how to play bongos and drums and such, you know. I hung out with the Germs, Darby Crash, who was, you know, before Bobby Pinn and Darby Crash, the same person. And hung out with all kind of, you know, LA groups, the Bags and the Weirdos and all those guys. And just became just crazed, you know, alcoholic, you know, punks that just caused nothing but menace all over Hollywood, you know. And became legendary and so on and so on. So I thought, well, I'm going to do something different in punk rock. Everybody's playing guitar, bass, and drums, and I'm a drummer, but I'm going to do something different. So being a conga player, I added conga drums to punk rock, which made it jungle punk. Playing the congas at Chaplin speed, you know, with electric violinist, guitar, bass, and drums, something different. And of course, on YouTube, you can see some of that late 70s stuff from the Starwood in LA, and so on and so on. And I do remember going to the Whiskey to see the Germs and Blondie. And Blondie opened up for the Germs because she wasn't even known. And of course, I went in the Whiskey with my sunglasses and my leather jacket, all cool and everything, drunk as a skunk on about 2 6-packs of Mickey's Malt liquor on an empty stomach. And I noticed this hot blonde, who was actually Blondie, going into the ladies' room. I thought, I'm going to be bold. And so what happened was she came out of the bathroom, and I grabbed her and forced her to kiss me. And she slapped my face really hard, and Chris Stein, her boyfriend, poured a beer on top of my head, and I gave him a punch right in the face, and I was thrown out by 2 bouncers on my elbows right out of the club. Okay, and I'd love to tell her I'm sorry these days, you know, for that, because she's probably somewhere in her 60s now too, and haven't seen her since, you know. But I think she mentioned that in an interview for some magazine, you know, and that was me that attacked her. I didn't mean to do that, but I was drunk. I couldn't help it. But I kissed Blondie. What a dream that was, and it became a reality. you know. So, anyways, so late 70s, you know, doing a lot of punk rock gigs, and then by 1980, Hollywood was starting to get really expensive. I mean, like $100 a month, every month was raised on my apartment. And now, of course, you got to be a Rockefeller, just live on Skid Row there, you know. I couldn't afford to live there no more. Same with London. So I moved to Phoenix in 1981. And that is where when I first got here, I met somebody at Zia Records, Jesse, as a matter of fact, who was working there, and Mike from East Side Records and those guys, you know. And Jesse, I walked into the record shop. I didn't know hardly anybody, you know, and I walked in with my first 45, and I said, hey, can I put these on consignment? You know, this is a punk rock thing with conga drums. And Jesse said, I know who you are. You're Eddie Detroit. He goes, I was at one of your gigs in the late 70s at the Starwood in Hollywood. He goes, you're thinking about moving to Phoenix? I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. I like it here. It's hot. You know, I love hot weather, you know. I got arthritis, so it's really helping me, you know, quite a bit. Yeah. And so he said, okay, great. I'm going to take you to this punk rock club called the Mad Gardens. And I'm going to play sax, and you're going to play your Arabic drum, and we're going to do something wild. You know, you'll be doing goat calls, you know, and I'll be doing a wild sax, you know, like meh, 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 meh. You know, and you're being Jamie Lamb. That kind of fits in too, by the way. You know, you're the lamb, I'm the goat. You know, we're a good team. Yeah. So, anyways, I just, everybody liked it so much that I was being asked to, you know, open for the Meat Puppets and be in Poets Corner, and you know, and then I met Alan and Rick from the Sun City Girls, and I inspired them, they inspired me, and blah blah blah, and that's how it all began. You know, everybody was really young at that time. I think I was 29 or 30 or something like that. Now I'm 63. You know, it's a long time ago, and so. We all became friends and recorded with each other, and I put out Immortal Gods in 1982, which was my first album. And my parents passed away and left me enough money to spend a lot of money on that album, which I did at Wakefield, and I think Stevie Nicks recorded there and stuff and whatnot, and a bunch of other celebrities. And so that album became a classic, and on the cover, of course, is a background of the Mystery Castle, which is haunted up on South Mountain here in Phoenix. And I read the lady's tarot cards who owned that place, and she was really impressed with my reading. And anyways, she let me use that as a background, and I rented a horse, a black stallion, and met this girl that was selling flowers who was only 17 years old, but she looked a lot like Nico, you know, with the high cheekbones and the witchy look and all that. So I hired her to be on the back of my horse like Lady Godiva, and I was all in black with a silver tie, you know, and Immortal Gods. That's how Immortal Gods started, with that cover with the Mystery Castle in the background, and became, I guess, world famous. And it's still selling today, that record, for some reason. But, you know, I was into the occult real heavy, you know, and stuff at that time. Got inspired by some very interesting people in Hollywood. That I was a member of an occult church called the Order of the Ram, and which doesn't exist anymore. I was a temple drummer for 9 years in that group, and Dr. Don Blythe, who was a biology teacher at UCLA, he inspired me, and he was in Ripley's Believe It or Not and Guinness Book of World Records, and he took me through hypnosis into my past lives and taped me, and he interviewed me while I was under hypnosis, and I was talking African language, which I can't even fake. I don't even know African language. So he played it back for me when I came to out of the hypnosis state, and he said, "Buddy, you've been a drummer in some primitive tribe, you know, somewhere in Africa or Haiti or something like that in a past life." And I believe that, you know, because that's what I feel, and I can really relate to that music, you know, and such, you know. So that's how that all came about. Yeah, so that's where we went from there. Then through the mid-'80s, again, doing a lot of punk rock gigs. By 1987, I was tired of punk rock, and I wanted to get back into folk music, because I've always been into folk music, you know, acoustic music. Even when I was a kid, you know, even taking drum lessons, I never listened to drummers. I listened to folk singers and songwriters. Why? I don't know. That's what I liked. You know, I liked the melody and songwriting, you know, and stuff, the lyrics and whatnot. So that's what I did in the late 80s. I started doing that, and then we take it from there.
So in the 90s, I know one of my favorite records of yours is Jungle Captive. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of Jungle Captive is representative of your work through the early to mid 90s. Is that the case?
Some my inspirational work, you mean, or what
some of the work that ended up on Jungle Captive.
Oh yeah.
It sounds like it was recorded over a number of years. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think from about 93 till about 97, in those years right there. Some of that stuff was inspired from a beach that I used to hang out at in about 7 miles past Malibu. It was called Pirates Cove, which was a nude beach of all things. And it was privately owned by a man who lived up on the hill, old man, who invited just whoever they wanted to be naked on his beach. There was a cave there and everything. Of course, this is before AIDS and everything, you know. And so there's all these naked people on there having a great time and drinking and smoking pot. And, of course, nobody could do anything about it because it was privately owned. It was like a private party. And even the cops came by on their helicopters with their binoculars, and we all waved to them, you know, blowing our smoke in their face and all that type of thing. And they couldn't do anything about it. So I was the first one to think, well, okay, I got this scathingly brilliant idea. I'm going to go ahead and bring acoustic musicians and bongos onto that beach and see if we can get, 100 people dancing naked, to this music. So I recorded actually my first 45 in 1976, I think it was, at Studio 9 in Hollywood, called Down at Party Beach, which the master copy got stolen. I've had a few records stolen, masters of mine over the years. That was one of them. But there's a snippet on YouTube under the Starwood gig that I did over there in 78 of Down at Party Beach. And so we recorded that, and that inspired me to record Jungle Captive in the 90s, along with some other inspiration, and such.
What was the inspiration behind Naked Grape Eating Ape Links?
Oh, okay. Naked Grape Eating Ape Links was, here I was tripping on mushrooms one morning at about 4 or 5 in the morning with a bunch of friends, and we said, hey, let's go somewhere outside and record with acoustic instruments and flutes and bongos, some kind of music, We didn't even have the title of it yet. So over here on 23rd Avenue in Indian School, where the canal is here in Phoenix, here we are at 5 in the morning underneath these trees and bushes and everything, while the water's going down the canal. Nobody was around, and I started playing bongos, and they're playing guitar and flutes and such, and I just made up some words. Here I'm tripping my brains out, and the cars going by looked like naked grape-eating ape-links. I just kept on going, naked grape-eating ape-links. Isn't it a thrill sitting high upon a hill watching naked grape-eating ape-links? And let me take a peeky of your naked leaky tiki and your naked grape-eating ape-links. Did you ever think to the ultra-link to cut up your nervous right hand? A heavenly thought to the bulk of the land and the grimace of her golden suntan? Naked grape-eating ape-links, and so on and so on, So we started doing that. We recorded on a cassette player, I thought, gosh, this would be great if we did it like electronic version or something like that with like primitive bongos and, modern primitive music, So we did that, and I had a friend of mine on there too singing backup vocals, who was this artist who did demon art by the name of Kenny Reagan, a good friend of mine, long story on that. And he ended up committing suicide and leaving me a suicide letter, and I found him dead, and that's a whole other story. And it was really hard to call his parents and let them know what happened, along with the police, So another story goes, so the Naked Grape Eating Ape Links was inspired, and put on the album, which was recorded different places. There was an S&M club that I used to belong to. I really got into S&M because, I'm really into the physical erotic play. Not a sex club. S&M is erotic play, safe, sane, and consensual. So this club that I used to belong to, I'd love to go back, but nobody wants to go with me. They're all afraid. There was these really cool nurses that I met at this hospital when I was in the hospital. And lo and behold, they show up on the weekends, the same nurses, at this club, and they dress up like dominatrixes. And they said, "Oh, Eddie, come here. We got something for you." And they stripped me naked and tied me to a leather, like horse type thing, blindfolded me and spanked me with a paddle. They go, "It's St. Paddle's Day." Wham! You know? And I went, "Wow, now that's exciting." You know? Then they brought out the floggers and gave me some whippings and stuff. Of course, again, safe, sane, and consensual, because there's a color code. You know, red means stop, green means go, and yellow change the pattern of the yellow pattern. So I worked with that, and I really got into it. So I stayed with that club for many years until of course, I don't drive. I got bad eyesight, so I can't find anybody these days that want to go because they're all afraid. You know, they're not into what I'm into. I like erotic play. You know, it breaks up the monotony of the norm, you know, as far as foreplay, you know. So that's how I got into that, and that's the late 90s, you know. And
so now bringing it into the new millennium, where have you been the last few years? Where do you see yourself going the next few years?
Well, in let's see, I guess it was the early 2000s, or was it late? No, I'm sorry, 2007. I fell in love with the mandolin. You know, I've been a drummer all my life and a lyricist and poet and whatnot. I fell in love with the mandolin. I got inspired from some folky musicians that played it. And I thought, that's a percussive instrument. And I'm a percussionist. I bet I can play that. I mean, I took guitar lessons and I couldn't get the hang of it, you know. The mandolin, I picked it right up, and within just a few lessons, here I am playing mandolin. I'm like, wow, you know, this is great. And so it made me a better songwriter. I'm singing more on key these days. And then I use a songwriter's rhyming dictionary for lyrics, you know, everything from A to Z and everything that rhymes with it. And so this made me a better songwriter, and I recorded a number of CDs between 2007 and just self-produced and all that between 2007 and now. And some of my stuff in between that was just released on the new Shaka Laka Lickum album, which is a compilation of songs between those years. Actually from 1995 to 2005, actually more than that, actually up until now. And now I'm working on a new one, which is this one that we're working on now, as a matter of fact. And it is called the Black Crow Gazebo, which is inspired by my friend Suzanne, who has multiple personalities, about 10 of them. And this album is about people with extreme multiple personalities, whether it be just regular chemical imbalance or drug addiction or alcohol addiction, or just plain eating too much meat, making them very aggressive. You know, I don't eat no red meat, although, you know, if it's fine for some people, I don't eat it because it makes me too aggressive, you know, and I can't digest it. So I'm a lot mellower person now than I was back in the punk rock days when I was a meat eater. You know, so we're happy now, that's for sure. Just doing it, and you know, just keep on writing more and more music every year. It's just inspirational with the mandolin and musicians like yourself and good friends and people, you know, that are into underground music, which I've been into underground music since the 60s, you know. People like Tyrannosaurus Rex, early Tyrannosaurus Rex, they inspired me. Donovan, who I've met twice. People like Lou Reed, Velvet Underground, Pearls Before Swine, another folk group, psychedelic folk group of the 60s. Incredible String Band, Steel Eye Span, there's another one. All this psychedelic folk music, which, again, you know, and I always say, well, I've had too much antacid in the 60s, but that's okay, you know. I'm like Donald Duck, I don't give a fuck, you know. And so, you know, at my age, I stay single, and I've got my, you know, one-night stands, and I'm happy with that, and it's just me and my trusty right hand, really.
Well, Eddie, it's been great talking to you, and look forward to hearing the record.
Thank you very much, Jamie.